Hello, grade 8s. I'm not able to be with you guys today, but instead of missing out on another class, we are going to do our lessons digitally. Please ignore any sounds that you're going to hear in the background, because right now the nighttime caretaker is vacuuming, so you might hear some of that. So we are now on chapter 4, and we're going to be talking about percents, decimals, and fractions. We're starting off with 4.1, where in this section we are going to be learning about how to represent percentages using something called a hundreds grid. So just like any other class, you're going to follow along with the slides as I move through them. You're going to follow along with the examples. I do want you to write them down on your notes. You're going to have some time to do your own examples or your own practice problems. And then I'm going to get you to go onto a website where you're going to just scroll through and get some more information about percents. At any point, if you need to, feel free to pause the video if you're copying down notes or you're copying down the example or doing your own practice problems. So we're going to get started. So we're going to go to the first slide. Okay, so you've learned about percents before. We did it a little bit in chapter 2. So whether you're a year-round student and you did this in August, or you're a traditional track student and you did this in the last 2 weeks, we've already kind of talked about percents and how to manipulate them and move them into being a fraction or to a decimal and back again. We're going to do a lot of practice of that in our 4th chapter here. So remember, percents are always out of 100. For example, if we say 30%, what that really means is that it's 30 out of 100. So if you're taking a test and there's 100 questions on your test because your teacher is mean and they gave you a whole bunch of questions and you only get 30% on that test, that means you only got 30 of those 100 questions correct. We could also represent 30% as a fraction, which is down here. So 30 is your numerator and 100 is your denominator. And we can also represent it as a decimal. So 0.30. How we'd move from our fraction to our decimal is you literally just divide it. So you would take your calculator, you would do 30 divided by 100 equals 0.30. Except on your calculator, it'll probably just show up as 0.3. But it's the exact same thing. On the right, you'll see what's called a hundreds grid. So it's called a hundreds grid because going across the top, there's 10 squares. And then going down the side, there's also 10 squares. So 10 times 10, if you're trying to find the area, would be 100. Or going back to what we did in chapter 3 a couple weeks ago, 10 squared equals 100, and that's a perfect square. So if we wanted to shade in 30% of our hundreds grid, we would be shading in 30 squares. There's lots of different ways to do it. Typically, what you're going to do is you're going to start either at the bottom of your big block of squares or at the top. You're typically going to move left to right. You could maybe also do right to left. It doesn't really matter. But the main point is that you're starting in one of the corners. You're not going to start right in the middle. That just wouldn't really make sense. So how I would do this is I would start in the top left-hand corner and we're going to shade. So some of you might already be able to jump the gun and just shade 30 blocks in right away. I'm going to go a little bit slower. So shading in 30 blocks. So I would start in the top here, and I'm going to shade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. My shading is not the greatest, but you guys can be a little bit more accurate on your paper when you have pencils and not when you're trying to draw on your screen. So that's 10, but we need 30. So we're going to shade in this whole row as well. That's 20. We need one more entire row. So we're going to do this one, and that's 30. right? Because here we have 3 rows of shaded in blocks. And then like I said before, up at the top, we have our 10 squares going across. So if you wanted to double check, 3 times 10 gives you 30. Oh, just imagine there's a 0 there. It doesn't want to write. Okay, so that's your 30%. So just another really quick review. Calculating percents of a number. So when we're calculating the percent of a number, you're going to follow these steps. So step number 1 is you're going to turn the percent into a decimal. Step number 2 is you're going to multiply that decimal by the number you are finding the percent of. You're going to multiply the decimal by the number you are finding the percent of. So that last little statement is kind of confusing. So let's look at an example. So example number 1. We are going to calculate 75% of 80. So we're finding a percentage of a number. So let's go back up to our steps really quick. So step number 1, turn the percent into a decimal. So our percent here is 75%. We need to convert that into a decimal point. So one way that you could do that is kind of a in-between step is I would first go and make it into a fraction. So we know 75% is 75 over 100. If you plug that into your calculator, you're going to get 0.75. Another way is if you are a little bit more advanced with math, you would just know, so you have 75, there's a decimal point there. Whenever you divide by 100, which is what you would be doing, you move the decimal place 2 places to the left, which will give you 0.75 like I found just before. So next is our second step. We are going to multiply the decimal by the number that you are finding the percent of. Really, that's just a complicated way of saying we're going to take our decimal, 0.75, and we're going to multiply it by the other number they gave us in the question, by 80. Let me just grab my calculator. Didn't think that part through. Normally I just get you guys to do all my calculations. So 0.75 times 80, and we get, as an answer, we get 60. So 75% of 80 is 60. That's your answer. Example number 2. Calculate 75% of 16. We're going to do one more together, and then I'll get you to do the last 2 on your own. So your first step is you're going to take your percent, which is 75%. I'm going to turn it into a fraction first, because we know percents are always out of 100. So 75 over 100 is the same as 75%. Put that in your calculator, and again, you're going to get 0.75. Then you're going to multiply by the other number that's given to you in the question. Or, hold on. Darn technology. Multiply it by 16, and you should get, let's see, let's calculate it. 0.75 times 16 equals 12. So 75% of 16 is 12. At this point, I want you to pause the video, and you're going to try B and C on your own. And then once you're done, you're going to unpause the video, and I will go over the answers with you. So pause the video and do these two practice problems. Okay, so let's do B. So 60% of 90. Again, I'm going to convert that into a fraction because we know percents are always out of 100. So 60% over 100. Put that in your calculator and you get 0.60. And we're going to multiply it by our other number that we're trying to figure out. So in our calculator, 0.6 times 90 gives us 54. Don't forget, it's always a good idea to double check your answers and just put the calculations in again into your calculator. If you're doing a question like this and your answer is larger than what's given to you in the question, so like let's say I did this and I got a weird answer like 120 for B. Well, 60% of 90 cannot be 120, right? That number is bigger. So anytime we're talking about percents, it has to be smaller than the original number that they give you. For C, 40% of 80. So we're going to put that into a fraction. So 40 over 100, right? Because percents are always out of 100. If you were to put that in your calculator, you'd get 0.40. Multiply that by the number given to you in the question, 80. So in your calculator, 0.4 times 80 gives you 32. And if you think about that, that number sounds right. So 40% should be a fairly low number. I would compare it maybe to 50%. 50% of 80 is just half of 80, which is 40. So 40% of 80 should be a number less than 40. Moving on. What if we have percents greater than 100%? So to represent a percent greater than 100%, you're going to shade in more than one hundreds grid. So for example, we're going to use our 100 grids to show how to shade in 170%. So remember, each hundreds grid represents 100. That's why it's called 100s grid. So if our number is 170, we can actually break that down into two parts. So one part will be 100, and the other part will be 70. So all we have to do is we shade in, and again, you can do this nicer than me. You're going to shade in one whole block. So just imagine, wow, that's terrible. But just imagine that this whole block is all shaded in. That's 100. Let's write that on top. So 100. So that means what we have left over now is our 70, which needs to go over here. So I'm going to start here. I'm just going to count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So all of those need to be shaded in. I'm going to do this somewhat quickly. Now I can just be lazy. I just shade everything else in. Shade in the middle. It's actually kind of fun. Except my pen stops working every now and then. I have so many gaps. Okay. And again, my computer won't let me write in this one space. There we go. I just have to use my finger apparently. I think I totally no, that's right. That's right. Okay, so what we have unshaded down at the bottom, these 3 rows here, that's 30, so 30 unshaded, and then up here we have our 70 shaded. So that's how you'd go about shading in your 100 blocks if you have a percent greater than 100. Example number 3. So this one is determining the percent represented in a grid. So you have the pictures there. What percent does this diagram represent? I'm going to give you 10 seconds for you to figure this out. If you need more time, pause it. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so you'll see here we have 300 grids. The first 2 are completely shaded in. So that's going to be 100 plus 100 plus whatever we have left over shaded in on the end here. So if we're just looking at the shaded in ones, it looks like you have 4 rows going up and then 7 blocks across. The pictures on my screen are kind of small. So if I got that wrong, please let me know during class. But if you add those up, 100 plus 100 plus 47 will give you 247. And since we're talking about percents, we need our percent sign in there. The percent sign is kind of like a unit, like how we talk about kilometers or hours. Percent is a unit. Okay, fractional percentages. So this is a percent that includes a portion of a percent. So we're going to be representing basically less than 1% in a block. So for example, like if I gave you 1/2% or 0.5%, or 0.42%. You can actually show those in a hundreds grid by just using one single, oh, of course it's not going to write for me, one single square. Okay, so let's take a look at what that will look like. So representing fractional percentages. To represent a fractional percentage between 0 and 1%, you're going to shade in part of one square. So usually on the diagrams that I'm going to show you, they will enlarge that one square. On your papers though, you would just have to take your one square and divide it up. So in our example here, what they're representing or what they're trying to show us is how to represent 1/3 of a percent. So really all they're doing is they're taking their square, their one individual square, the one that's kind of blown up there, and since our fraction is 1/3, we're going to split up our square into 3 even portions. And then we only need to shade in one of them because it's 1/3. If I wanted to shade in like a 2/3 of a percent, we would just shade in a second one. So it's just that easy. Example number 4. What percent does this diagram represent? So I'll give you 10 seconds to figure that out. If you need more time, hit pause. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. So what that little, this enlarged box here, what that represents is it's representing a fractional percent. It's split up into 4 even parts. And only one of them is shaded in. So the percent that that's going to represent is 1/4%, or 1/4 of a percent. Okay, example number 5. How would you represent 1/8 of a percent using your 100 grid below? So what I'm going to do, you can do this also on your piece of paper, or you can just, I'll try to just squish it in. I don't remember how large I made your hundreds grids on there. Is I'm going to take this one square here, I'm going to enlarge it. So we're trying to represent 1/8 of a percent. So what we have to do is we need to split up our one rectangle or our one square into 8 parts. So I'm going to divide it into half first. And then I'm going to have 4 on the top and then 4 on the bottom. So I'm actually just going to go like this. And since we need to shade in 1/8, we're just going to take one of our boxes, because now we have 8 boxes, and just shade it in. And that's it. 1/8. And again, that's just inside of this one little box. This one here that we've blown up. Okay, so next, percent's greater than 100%. So to represent a fractional percent greater than 1%, you're going to shade squares from a hundreds grid to show the whole numbers, and then part of a square from the grid to show your fraction of a percent. So just like in this picture here. So in your hundreds grid, it's representing 75 and 1/3%. So you'll see they've shaded in 75 squares, and then that 1 the fractional percent, they've taken that block out, and just like before, they split up that into 3, and they shaded in one of those 3. So essentially it's the 75, wow, that's horrible. The 75 full squares plus that 1/3 of a square. So now we're just combining just like the regular percents with the fractional percents. Okay, example number 6. What percent does this diagram represent? So I'm going to give you 15 seconds. Pause if you need more time. Answer the question. What percent does this diagram represent? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the first thing you need to do is you need to count how many total squares are colored in or are shaded in completely. We're not going to look at the fractional one just yet. So it looks like, again, this is really small on my screen, but it looks like we have 74 full shaded in squares. And then they've blown up our fractional percentage, which shows a percentage that's less than 1%. Total, there are 10, or they've separated it into 10 spots, and they shaded in 8 of them. So you could write that as 74 and 8/10 of a percent, or you can even reduce that into lowest terms. So it would be 74, and then I would divide the numerator and denominator by 2. So 74 and 4/5 of a percent. Example number 7. How would you represent 42 and 5/8 of a percent using the 100 grid below? So I would like you to pause the video so that you can try this one on your own, and then unpause it when you're ready to see me go over it. Okay, so let's go over this. So we need to first fill in 42 complete squares. So I'm going to start from the bottom. No, I'm not. Yeah, I will. Okay, I'm going to start from the bottom and count up. So I need to fill in that one, 2, 3. So we for sure need to fill in 40. So I'm just going to shade in all of this. And now it could be messy. Okay, so I've shaded in 40 so far. We need to shade in 42. So I'm going to add 2 more blocks. And now we need to represent our fractional percent. We need to represent the 5/8. So in this block here, I'm just going to draw this over here so we can actually see it. (5/8). So we need to split off our square into 8 equal parts. So I'm just going to draw the line going across. And we're going to have 4 on the top, 4 on the bottom, just like before. They should generally be equal. Those aren't really equal, but that's okay. So now we just need to shade in 5 of them. So there's 4. We'll shade in this last one, and that's 5. Oops. Okay, so that's 42 5/8%. So it says homework practice questions. It's not for homework. You probably have time to work on it right now. So what I want you to do is I want you to finish off the examples that are in your notes. You should pause the video right now, do those practice problems, and then unpause to see these solutions. Okay, so let's quickly go over the extra questions from your notes. So the first question was to represent 180%. So they gave you 200s grids, so we need to break down 180% because it can only be 100 maximum. So we're going to break it down into 100 plus 80. So this whole first one gets shaded in horribly. But that whole one gets shaded in. And then on this one, we're only going to shade in, we'll do our 10 across, and we'll do our 8s. Ooh, that's horrible. Our 8s down. So it doesn't matter if you start at the top or at the bottom, as long as you have them all shaded in to represent 80. Again, though, when you're doing this, you need to shade it in a lot nicer than I'm shading it in right now. I'm doing a super lazy teacher job of this, but I'm also not doing it with pen and paper, so it's a little trickier. Okay, so on the left we have our 100. On the right we have our 80. Next one, extras from your notes. So you need to represent 0.6%. So 0.6%. So we know that 0.6 is less than 1. So this is going to be a fractional percent. Basically, it's going to be 60% of one little block. So if I take one block, I'm going to draw it down here. So it's a little confusing now on knowing how many equal little parts we need to split up this square into. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to split it up into 10 parts, 10 equal parts, because we need 0.6. What that's really going to equal to is 60% of 1%. Okay, so we're going to split that up into 10. So I'm going to draw my middle line. We're going to have 5 on top, 5 on bottom. And then we're going to shade in just 6. So we're shading all the ones on the top. So that's 5 plus 1 more. That's 6. And we would not touch the rest of the hundreds grid because it doesn't tell us that there's any whole numbers that we need to shade in. We only have the decimal, which represents a portion of a percent. Represents 12 3/4%. So 12, you're just going to have one whole row of 10. Okay, so there's 10. And then from the second row, we're going to do 11, 12, and then this last one we're going to pull out. And we're going to draw it in just a larger box so it's easier to draw. We need 3/4%. So we are going to use our denominator, the 4, and split up our boxes into 4. Just like that. And now we just shade in 3 of them. So if I did want to show that on the hundreds grid, oh, see, that's already horrible. You could just shade it actually onto their hundreds grid right away. I'm doing a terrible job. There, that kind of looks like 3/4. Okay, so that's our last example. If you aren't done that though, you should do it for homework. If you are done all the example and the practice problems, what I want you to do is I want you to go to this website. So https://www.mathisfun.com/percentage.html. So obviously yours is going to look different just in terms of the colors, but you're just going to scroll through and you're going to read through all the examples that they have, and they also have 100 grids, and I just want you to read through that. Okay, so what you should do is you should pause the video right here, and then I would go to your web browser and I would type in this URL, this website, to access this web page. And that is it for today. Tomorrow, just so you know, I will be having an entrance slip for you. So I'm going to give you a percent and some 100 grids, and you are going to have to represent that percent on your 100 grids. Okay? Good luck.